Welcome to the Language Alchemy podcast, where you transform your communication to create and maintain meaningful relationships at home and at work. I'm your host, Alejandra Siroca, and I help multicultural individuals, couples, and change makers move beyond surface-level politeness and conflict avoidance to have authentic, value-based interactions that actually resolve issues and deepen connection. If you're tired of rehashing conversations in your head, walking on eggshells, or feeling misunderstood in your most important relationships, this podcast will give you a new way forward. And if you've been thinking about getting support with your communication, visit languagealchemy.com to find out which transformative communication program is most beneficial for you. I like to start with a shout out to some people who have been emailing me and letting me know how much they're appreciating and learning from this multicultural communication and belonging series. Jill, thank you for telling me you work with immigrant students and you already thought you had a pretty good, compassionate understanding of them, but that this series is increasing your sense of compassion. Daza, thank you for telling me you believe every single person who interacts with immigrants should listen to the series. Natalie, thank you for telling me the series is excellent. Candice, thank you for sharing that the third episode of the series created so much more understanding between you, a Canadian, and your Spanish-speaking boyfriend, and that you listened to the episode together. Maria del Carmen, thank you for letting me know you felt grateful I was sharing this content with the world. This is exactly why I have the podcast. When you, my dear audience, let me know how you received this podcast, it helps me renew my commitment to share transformative communication tools you can put into practice right away. Thank you. And now, let's talk about where we are in this multicultural communication and belonging series. In our previous episode number 4 of the series, we looked at xenophobic language, the words and phrases that carry painful histories, often without our awareness, and that send a quiet message that says, you do not belong here. Today, we are going to explore questions, specific questions that get asked of immigrants, of people of color, of anyone who's perceived as being from quote-unquote somewhere else. On the surface, these questions can sound like curiosity, friendliness, even like a compliment. But underneath these questions, there's an assumption, and that assumption stings. These questions are microaggressions, and by the end of this episode, you will understand exactly why and what you can do about it, whether you are the one asking them or the one being asked. So, what are microaggressions? The term microaggression was coined in the early 1970s by Dr. Chester M. Pierce. Dr. Pierce was a medical doctor and professor at Harvard Medical School. He used it to describe the subtle, brief, commonly daily behaviors and communications that functions as a combination of insults and dismissals, ones that accumulate over time and can have a serious impact on the physical and mental health of the person receiving them. Dr. Daryl Wing Su at Columbia University later expanded the term to include anyone who belongs to a marginalized group, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or national origin. He described microaggressions as the daily slights, put-downs, and indignities communicated by well-intentioned people who are often unaware of the hidden messages they are sending. And this last part is important, well-intentioned, because in the vast majority of cases, the person asking the question is not trying to hurt anyone. They think they are making conversation, and yet the person on the receiving end experiences what can only be described as an internal ouch, a shaky, disorienting feeling like something just shifted under your feet. Microaggressions are sometimes called death by 1,000 paper cuts. Each one in isolation might seem small, but for the person who receives them, on a daily basis, from strangers, from colleagues, from people they consider friends, they accumulate and they take a toll. If you want to go much deeper on microaggressions, including how to respond when you receive them or witness them, I have a whole episode devoted to that. And that's episode number 46. I will add the link in the show notes. To illustrate microaggressions, I want to share a story from when I was living in Boston. I was a teacher living in a house with other roommates in the outskirts of Boston. One of those roommates was also a teacher. One day, the phone rang and I answered it. It was a student calling for my roommate, the teacher. I told him she was not at home and I asked him if I could take a message. He said no, and then we hung up. The next day, my roommate told me what happened. Her student said, I called you on the phone and your Mexican maid answered. I didn't leave a message because I wasn't sure she would understand it, or she would probably say something wrong to you. My roommate found it hilarious. She laughed at the idea that she, a teacher, could afford someone to clean her home. She didn't address the microaggression with her student or with me. I was not laughing. What this student had done, without knowing me, without knowing anything about me except the sound of my voice and my accent, was to reduce me to a stereotype. He assumed that people who speak with an accent must be from Mexico. He also assumed that anyone who comes from Mexico works cleaning homes. He assumed I would not understand the message correctly. He assumed I would not be able to communicate it. And he decided, based on all of that, that I was not worth speaking to. Of course, he didn't have any intention of causing any harm. He was simply operating from the assumptions that most likely were passed down to him through teaching, conversations, and modeling from people in his life, as well as society and culture, about what a voice with a certain accent on the phone meant, about who lived in that apartment, about what kind of person I must be, about what kind of education I must or not have, and where I belonged or didn't. As you may have heard me say in previous episodes, transparency and honesty are important values of mine. So I want to be honest and transparent with you when I share that this incident had an impact for me, a negative one. For a period of time after that, whenever I introduced myself to someone new, I didn't just say my name, Alejandra. I would also say that I was a teacher, that I spoke multiple languages, that I had 2 master's degrees. You know what I was trying to do? Without being fully conscious of it, I was trying to counter the narrative before it could unfold. I was preemptively defending myself against assumptions I hadn't even heard from the new person I was just meeting. That is what microaggressions do. They don't just hurt in the moment. They change how you show up. So let's look at some of the most common questions directed at immigrants and people perceived to be from, quote unquote, somewhere else. And I want to look at each question carefully, not to assign blame, but to understand what assumption lives underneath the question, because that is where this thing comes from. So the first question is, where are you really from? This might be the most common microaggressive question immigrants receive. I cannot tell you how many times I've been asked this question, even after I say something like, I'm from California, I'm from the Bay Area, or I'm also from Marin. When the question comes again, it's usually accompanied with a but in front, as, but where are you really from? This little word, really, communicates that the answer is not sufficient. This stings, especially when you've made so much effort to belong to a place, to a community, and to the country that you're now calling home. When you get this question, but where are you really from? The underlying assumption is you cannot be from here. something about you, your accent, your appearance, your name, that places you outside of what belongs in here. That word really is doing a lot of work. It's saying, I have already decided you are not from this country or from this community or from this city or from this place. Just one word. This is why I keep talking about how powerful language is and how important it is for us to use it consciously in alignment with our values. A close relative of this question is, that's a beautiful name. Where were you born? Oh, like many microaggressions, this one arrives like wrapped in a compliment, which makes it confusing as the recipient because you feel hurt, but then you feel like you shouldn't because it came with flattery until you realize, oh, it's the assumption underneath. It's saying, your name sounds foreign to me. Therefore, I assume you were born somewhere else because then I will know how to categorize you, how to communicate with you, what I can or cannot talk to you about, and where you belong. Then there are these questions that are asked to different people who have an appearance of being from a specific ethnic background. Questions like, are you good at dancing? I bet you are. To someone who's perceived as Latinx. Or, you're good at math, right? To someone who's perceived as Asian. These questions reduce a person to a cultural stereotype before maybe a real conversation has taken place. Because they say, I already have a story about who you are based on where you come from. Even if these questions are enthusiastic or well-meaning, they place a person in a box. And the box is built from generalization, not from curiosity about who they actually are. And of course, there's a perception that because of the appearance of this person has to be from somewhere else. In other words, this person doesn't belong here. Again, I'll be honest with you, and when I've been asked the question if I'm a good dancer, I sometimes say, yes, I started taking dance lessons when I was 5. I took ballet, flamenco, then jazz dance. Then later on, when I lived in the Caribbean, I learned Caribbean dances. And much later, I took tango lessons and African dance lessons, Middle Eastern dance lessons. And yes, I have taken so many dance classes. How about you? And of course, if I am responding from the hurt and I'm being passive aggressive, I usually get a spoonful of my own medicine because the other person usually says, oh, you're a good dancer because it must be in your blood. So I don't recommend answering this way. Now, a similar thing that happens, although this is not a question, is when people start talking to someone in another language, like Spanish, because of the way the person looks, even though the person hasn't spoken yet. Okay, let's continue with common microaggressive questions. One that I also get asked a lot is your spouse from your country? This question carries the assumption that immigrants don't fully integrate into society or that they prefer, quote unquote, their own kind. And you could say, well, this is asked out of genuine curiosity. Yes, it could be. And it also implies that there's an expectation or that the natural thing to do is to choose a partner from the same country of origin. 2 other questions are, did you come from a big family or how did you come here? These questions may seem innocent, but they're often shaped by stereotypes. The assumption that immigrants from certain regions come from large families, or the implication in the how you came here that the method of arrival might have been irregular or undocumented. The important thing to know here is that these questions aren't asked of everyone. They are asked of specific people based on how they look or sound. And it's that selectivity that makes them a microaggression. And perhaps one of the most painful questions is to be asked, what are you? This may be when someone feels uncertain about your racial or ethnic identity and they feel they must know. This question is insulting. It doesn't only say you are a stranger, you're not from here, or you do not belong. It's also dehumanizing. And this happened to me actually. When I came to the United States, I had been living in the Caribbean. My skin was much darker because I spent a lot of time in the sun. And I was at a store and another customer kept following me, asking me, what are you? And he asked me, are you Egyptian? Are you Arab? Are you Middle Eastern? Are you Spanish? Are you... And he kept going, are you Brazilian? And he kept going on and on and on. Finally, I went into a fitting room and I stayed there until I saw that he turned around and left. Microaggressive questions affect two people, the one asking the question and the one being asked. And that's why I want to offer something for both of you. If you recognize that you have been asking or that you usually ask these kinds of questions that are microaggressive when you are in the presence of someone you perceive as someone, quote unquote, from somewhere else, notice your internal dialogue. Be conscious in your internal dialogue and say to yourself, I am perceiving you as being from somewhere else. And before you ask anything, notice what assumptions you are making about the other person. What do you already believe about this person that's leading you to ask questions about their origin? Then you can even check, is that assumption something you know to be completely true? Or is it something that you've absorbed from the culture around you? Be truly honest with yourself. And if you want to go even deeper, then you can ask yourself this question. Would you ask this same question of someone who looks like the people in the dominant group of where you live? If the answer is no, then it means the question is not really about curiosity. It's about othering. And I know that if you are listening to this podcast, othering and creating spaces where people feel they do not belong is not in alignment with your values. So choose differently. If you're really curious and want to get to know the other person, instead of where are you really from or any of the other microaggressive questions we talked about here, ask them what they do, what they love doing, what brought them to the city. There are so many questions you can ask. Let them tell you their story in their own way, on their own terms. Now, if you are someone who receives these questions and you are an immigrant or a person of color in the United States or children of immigrants, you almost certainly do. I want you to know that you are not obligated to answer a question that assumes something harmful about you. You are the one who gets to decide how much of your story to share with whom and when. However, you can respond to the question with something like, that's an interesting question. What makes you ask? This redirects the attention back to the assumption underneath. Or let me give you another option. You can simply say, I'm not sure why that came up, but I'd love to talk about something else entirely. And then you redirect the conversation. If you'd like to have a much deeper exploration of how to respond to microaggressions, including very specific strategies, listen to episode 46. I will add the link in the show notes. And now let's recap what you've heard in this episode. In this 5th episode of the Multicultural Communication and Belonging series, we focused on microaggressive questions, the questions that sound like curiosity or friendliness, but carry an othering assumption underneath. We talked about what microaggressions are. We talked about the most common microaggressive questions directed at immigrants and people of color. Finally, I offered a transformative communication tool for you, if you now recognize that you tend to ask microaggressive questions, and also for you, if you're the recipient of microaggressive questions and you want to respond in ways that do not create more harm to yourself or others. Thank you so much for listening. In our next episode, you are going to have a treat because I'm going to have a conversation about accent with an expert, a speech therapist who is going to discuss with me how we hear accent, how it shapes the way we perceive people, and what listeners and speakers can do to understand each other and communicate to each other that we all belong together. Until next episode, and as we say in Argentina, ciao ciao! Original music by Gary LaPoe. You can find all links in the show notes at languagealchemy.com.